This is an MOS VPS 250 computer. It came out in 1985, weighed 47 pounds, and cost about $3,000. Okay, great, but what is it? What did it do? Well, these were the exact questions that I had when I first spotted this on eBay a couple of years ago. The original listing actually called it an MDS Postmaster, but I could tell the letters were MOS, and actually thought this might be some long-forgotten product from MOS Technology. There might even be a 6502 powering this thing. Seeing that it was a local item and listed for only $1.25, I figured this mystery was worth investigating, so I went ahead and picked it up, and here's what I found out. The VPS stood for Video Postal System, and this was a point-of-sale computer made for the mailing and shipping industries. The fact that they shared a name with MOS Technology was just a coincidence. Both companies named themselves after MOS integrated circuit technology that allowed for a greater density of transistors per chip. MOS stood for metal oxide semiconductor and was all the rage in the late 1960s and 70s when both companies formed. Now, like any good retro computing enthusiast, whenever I get an old piece of tech like this, I love to do research on it. However, because information on point-of-sale history is so scarce and sometimes inaccurate, I was forced to look through old magazine and newspaper articles and even reached out to some folks that worked on these systems back in the day.
Oh, hiya, gorgeous.
I was surprised to find out that the race to build the best point-of-sale systems drove early computing innovations, from touchscreen graphical displays to the design of the first microprocessors. In practically every video or article about microprocessors, the story always seems to jump from they were first used in calculators to computers. However, point-of-sale systems were one of the key considerations in their design, as companies competed to dominate an untapped market that would soon be worth billions. I am here to tell that story. We start our journey where it all began, Dayton, Ohio, 1879. This is where the very first mechanical cash register was invented by a saloon owner named James Riddy. He called the invention the incorruptible cashier because his staff kept on stealing from him, and he wanted a system that was automated and honest. In 1884, a man named John Henry Patterson acquired the rights for the machine for $6,500 and formed the National Cash Register Company, better known today as NCR. Then in 1906, NCR employee Charles F. Kettering installed an electric motor, thus heralding the age of electric cash registers, and for the next several decades that was really the last major change in their design. Then in the mid-40s, the technology needed to advance cash registers was starting to take shape. It began with the ENIAC, the first programmable electronic computer. The designers J. Presper Eckert and John Mauchly then formed their own company, EMCC, to commercialize computers. This caught the attention of Harry Strauss, an engineer and entrepreneur who saw computers as a way to modernize electromechanical systems called totalisators, which he sold through his company American Totalisator, more commonly known as AmTote. Initially built with telephone relays and rotary switches, the tote was an incredible feat of engineering used at racetracks that would issue your tickets, automatically calculate the bets and payouts, and present the information on large displays called tote boards. The first complete system went online in 1933 at the Arlington Park Racecourse in Chicago. It contained several dozen ticket-issuing machines that sent electrical impulses to relays as bets were processed, stepping the rotary switches to match the value. The final position would activate a set of indicator relays to illuminate the right combination of light bulbs to form numerical displays on the tote board. He initially wanted to use computers to build an all-electronic calculating system for his device, but soon realized their potential was much bigger than the tote board, saying at the time, "This is the future. This thing is going to be everywhere." He had AmTote invest $500,000 in EMCC, which literally saved the company and financed them to build the now legendary UNIVAC computer in 1948. CBS would famously use it to predict President Eisenhower's landslide victory a few years later. With AmTote now owning a 40% stake in the company, they were on track to becoming a large computer business. However, before the first orders could be fulfilled, Strauss was tragically killed in a plane crash in October 1949, leading AmTote to withdraw their support and forcing EMCC to be sold to a new buyer, one by the name of Remington Rand, a company that sold everything from pistols to electric razors to typewriters. They were a well-known brand, and within a few years, the featured sponsor on the #1 game show in America, What's My Line, meaning that they had a powerful tool to promote their products, including the UNIVAC. At the time, the cash register was just a simple adding machine that sat on a till, and you'd be lucky if it even had subtract or subtotal functionality. Then in 1954, the Telecomputing Corporation made the point-o-sale recorder, later sold through Remington Rand. The $5,400 device was actually a three-part system consisting of a cash register, tag reader, and tape perforator. In addition to adding, the cash register could subtract, subtotal, mark down, and apply tax, among other things. Then there was the tag reader. Only a few companies at the time were applying tags to their merchandise using punch card standards established by companies like Kimball and Dennison. Each card was encoded with up to 29-digit unique identifiers. Lastly, there was the tape perforator, which recorded the details of each transaction on paper tape. The idea was that at the end of the day, someone would feed that tape into a UNIVAC system or convert it into magnetic tape to produce an audit log for reporting and inventory purposes. The point-of-sale recorder was a major step forward for retailers, but to be the complete package, the system would need to skip the slow paper tape conversions and go online. Luckily, there was already a company working to accomplish exactly that. RCA was designing a revolutionary new kind of retail system, one connected to a network of computerized cash registers. Each register was called a sales recorder and was connected to a central computer, appropriately called the Recorder Central. The idea was that the transaction data would be instantly communicated and stored on magnetic tape at the point of sale. The tape could then be fed into RCA's Bismack computer to track spending trends and update inventory. However, each sales recorder was doing much more than just sending data to a magnetic tape. There was a modern feedback verification process, meaning that as the cashier was performing transactions, the sales recorder would constantly check with the Recorder Central if the keystroke was valid for that type of transaction, locking the keys and displaying an error if the input was inappropriate or out of order. Each recorder was acting as a terminal in what is likely the earliest example of client-server technology being used in a commercial setting. The magnetic drum memory even stored product descriptions, prices, and a list of customers with good credit. The lead designer of this project was Arnold Spielberg, as in Steven Spielberg's dad. Yes, seriously. Spielberg was an accomplished computer engineer who early in his career managed a small department store, so he was perfect for the job. By 1956, the online sales recording system was ready for prime time, but department stores were super budget conscious and nervous about the expensive new technology. So, as a compromise, RCA agreed to split the cost of the trial sponsored by AMC. And no, we're not talking about the movie theater, we're talking about the Associated Merchandising Corporation. Essentially, they were the buying authority for several major department store chains that negotiated good rates for buying merchandise in bulk. To fund their part, AMC received money from several stores who wished to participate in a single trial location. The guinea pig was the Higbee's department store in Cleveland. The same store featured prominently in the movie A Christmas Story. RCA installed 10 sales recorders in the men's fashion department, each one equipped with a keyboard, tag reader, and printer. The trial lasted for 15 months, with notable improvements to efficiency. However, it would only stay online for about 8 hours at a time before crashing. This is because computers in the mid-50s were not yet transistorized. They were built with thousands of vacuum tubes with diodes inside them and required constant maintenance. In the end, AMC felt it was a great concept, but the technology was just too new. Still, the project yielded the world's first point-of-sale computer, changing the way retail processing would forever be done. The significance probably went over the head of 10-year-old Steven Spielberg, but he should certainly be proud of his dad now. As for RCA, they would use the experience to help design what would be their transistorized 501 computer toward the end of the decade. Then, in 1961, another breakthrough occurred. AmTote was back with a new kind of computerized register called the UniTote 101 system. Similar in concept to RCA's solution, the UniTote was a network of retail terminals connected via telephone wire to a central computer control unit. However, using the latest technology, their device was completely programmable, so it did not require an expensive custom project for simple changes. Robinson's department store was one of the first customers to use it. They field tested the system for 2 months at their Glen Burnie store in Maryland during the Christmas season of '61. They reported great success, as these features practically eliminated human error, drastically reduced customer wait times, and greatly improved inventory tracking, alerting the store when new stock was needed. Now, the UniTote just happened to come out when computer technology was advancing at a great pace. In the early years, the terminals were still electromechanical, much like their cash register counterparts, and required relays for stepping functions. However, as the semiconductor industry started designing MOS integrated circuits, it allowed for advances in features like gating, multiplexing, and mass storage. This led to the world's first $1 million point-of-sale contract in 1966, selling 250 units to the Joseph Magnin Company. They were a high-end department store on the West Coast, whose clientele included big names like Marilyn Monroe, Linda Bird Johnson, and Liberace. Then in May 1969, General Electric shocked the retail world by striking a $10 million deal with JCPenney to install their new product. They had built it in complete secrecy, hoping to totally disrupt the market with their new system. The product was called TRADAR, and it stood for Transaction Data Recorder. These were terminals connected to two GE 425 mainframe computers, tracking the details of each transaction on journey tapes. TRADAR could process your credit cards, check your credit scores, collect transaction details, and scan magnetically encoded tickets for each product. They conducted an extensive trial at their Glendale location starting in late '67, performing over 500,000 transactions across 15 terminals. And despite having positive feedback from everyone involved, JCPenney executives grew fearful about spending so much money on what they considered a risky move. Rumor has it that NCR had demonstrated an early version of their 280 retail system, promising TRADAR-like capabilities upon release, but with the support and infrastructure that they would need to scale. By all accounts, TRADAR was a great system, but maybe it was an example of the right message from the wrong messenger. Plus, to use the new tagging feature, the clothing manufacturers would also have to adopt the new system and tag the items before delivering them to the stores, so they backed out of the agreement. This likely frightened many retail investors who were now wondering if the market was even ready for this sort of technology. Those fears would eventually cool when in 1972, Sears signed a record $70 million deal with the Singer Corporation to install their data terminal registers. More importantly, the deal sent a clear signal to the industry that there was still demand for computer-style network retail solutions. Oh, and guess what? JCPenney did end up signing with NCR after all, giving credence to the reason for their exiting of the TRADAR agreement. Now, many of these companies were experimenting with some form of magnetic or optical scanning techniques, but for point of sale to truly be transformative, a consistent approach to product scanning would have to be reached, along with buy-in from the manufacturers. And that's exactly what happened when in 1973, a universal standard coding system was finally agreed on for barcode scanning. Enter the Universal Product Code, better known as UPC. The now iconic symbol of seemingly random lines and numbers was designed with three distinct identifiers encoded within it: the company prefix, the product number, and the check digit. Before UPC, each product had to have price tags manually applied to it with tagging guns. If you've ever worked in retail, you may have used these for clearance section items, but imagine doing this for thousands of products and any time new stock arrived. While both retailers and manufacturers embraced the new system, there was pushback from labor unions who feared the optimizations may lead to massive layoffs, as well as by conspiracy theorists who were warning about the harmful effects of the lasers and how UPCs were just a corporate plot designed to dupe customers into paying more money. In the end, the technology won out. That same year, one of the first companies to use this was IBM, who announced their 3650 and 3660 supermarket systems. Like TRADAR, the 3660 had terminals connected to a computer controller. However, one terminal can now speak to others in an early example of peer-to-peer communication over a local area network. With the implementation of UPC scanning, cashiers could now simply slide the items over plastic windows embedded in the counter. The laser scanned the item and immediately listed the product description and price from the database table stored in the computer's memory. It even printed an itemized receipt. This may seem really simple now, but it was revolutionary for the time.
And my husband says, $112, what did you buy? I say, this.
However, it would take a while before the 3660 was actually installed in stores, and another company beat them to performing the first public sale using UPC. On June 26, 1974, at a Marsh supermarket in Troy, Ohio, a customer had their product's UPC code scanned by a cashier on an NCR 255 terminal system. The item? A 10-pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit gum.
Juicy fruit.
The NCR unit was connected by a 16-bit mini-computer. In addition to the scanning capabilities, the terminal could also calculate the total bill, update inventory, and even validate and process credit cards. It could even be run in a standalone mode should one or both of the store computers go down. However, in terms of redundancy, Unitote's latest 300 series was even more impressive. Those terminals had enough internal memory to continue to track dozens of transaction details should their data general host computers go offline, Then they would synchronize automatically when back online. But how is that possible? Normally, these terminals relied entirely on their host computer to do the actual computer processing. The secret was thanks to one unique innovation. Each terminal system was powered by a microprocessor. For the first time in history, you could group thousands of tiny transistors and other components into the size of a quarter-inch square, allowing for all of the computer's logic and arithmetic to reside on a single chip. In this case, both companies were using the Intel 4004, the world's first microprocessor. At the same time, another young company called Data Terminal Systems was also embracing this new computer-on-a-chip technology. DTS was founded by Robert Collings and Murray Rubin, two former DEC employees. They wanted to make something simpler and more cost-friendly than the large store computer setups that everyone else was offering. Powered by the Rockwell PPS-4, another 4-bit microprocessor, they created one of the first standalone computerized cash registers. By being able to quickly change the device and software versus hardware for different markets, they could sell it for under $1,000 and totally democratize point-of-sale technology for all businesses, both big and small. Now obviously a 4-bit processor can only do so much, so Intel was quick to design the 8008, the first 8-bit microprocessor. In 1974, McDonald's became one of the first companies to use it in their point-of-sale solution. And yes, this is an actual picture of their menu prices at the time. So you're telling me I could get a cheeseburger, fries, a drink, and a triple ripple ice cream cone for under $1? It's almost like I'm looking at a different planet, and it certainly brings new meaning to the dollar menu concept. Anyways, to design this new technology, they sought the expertise of William Brobeck and Associates. Brobeck was a big name in engineering, particularly for his key role in nuclear physics, with particle accelerators back in the 30s and 40s. Among his accomplishments, he had designed the 60-inch cyclotron in 1939, the largest and most powerful accelerator of its day. This new McDonald's device revolutionized the way that quick-service restaurants could process orders. They had buttons for each menu item and a number for the quantity, simplifying the order-taking process greatly. The history of how the 8008 microprocessor came to be is an interesting one. They were originally commissioned for $50,000 by a customer of theirs called DataPoint. They wanted Intel to build a processor on a single chip as a way to reduce the heat generated from the machine. However, by the time Intel finished the project, the heating concerns had already been solved, with the DataPoint 2200 boasting about 100 discrete TTL components. Therefore, they released their rights to the chip, allowing Intel to sell it publicly. In retrospect, it's easy to call out DataPoint's mistake in not buying the rights to the chip, but they were not alone. Many game designers initially dismissed microprocessors, despite the fact that some analysts predicted that arcade games would be easier to build that way. In fact, the first game to use one was released in November of 1975, and they were still making games as late as 1980 in the US that used discrete logic. Amazingly, DataPoint's design outperformed most microprocessors throughout the 70s, but ultimately succumbed to Moore's law of greater technology at lower costs. Incidentally, Gordon Moore, for whom the law was named, had just co-founded Intel in 1968. It's crazy to think of Intel as a small startup company, but entering the 70s, they had just over 100 employees. Then there was Motorola. Back in 1972, seeking to capture some of the point-of-sale market, they acquired the rights to the Regitel retail computer and subsequently started designing their own processor, the 6800. You have to consider that at the time, few people really understood the true potential of microprocessors outside of building better calculators, but one Motorola engineer certainly had some ideas. Let's go back to the TRADAR system for a second. Well, even though that system was a commercial flop, there just happened to be a young GE engineer who saw the potential. That employee was Chuck Peddle, and in 1970 he separated from GE and started his own company with the intention of building point-of-sale terminals. However, he quickly ran out of funds and couldn't find investors, so he took on temporary work assignments until he could get some capital to build his dream machine. One of those temp jobs was as an engineer for Motorola's 6800 project. Announced in 1974, Motorola originally sold the 6800 for $360 to match Intel's price. Along with the chip, buyers received a 700-page manual that provided detailed instructions for building a retail system, complete with how to add scanning wands and printers for receipts. It was clear that point of sale was a major consideration of its design. One of the first big companies to use it was aerospace giant TRW. They wanted to try their hand in this new retail market. That's right, TRW, the guys responsible for building the Pioneer spacecrafts and were searching for life on Mars on the Viking missions. They at the same time wanted to help cashiers sell you the latest fashion at your local department store. It was a unique time. And their go-to market strategy was equally unique, as they bought out all of the Singer Corporation's business machines division, which included 35,000 of those data terminal registers mentioned earlier in that Sears deal. This led to a $325 million write-off for Singer and allowed for instant market penetration for TRW. In 1976, they announced their 2001 system, with each terminal costing about $4,000 and the store-level computers starting at $48,000. While some companies like TRW could afford the chip, the price was just too high for hobbyists and startups. So in August of that year, Chuck Peddle, Bill Mensch, and the rest of the Core 6800 engineers left Motorola to join MOS Technology with the desire to sell a more affordable chip with a more optimized design. Soon thereafter, the 6502 was released and priced at just $25. As a result, anybody who wanted to could now build their own computers. The 6502 helped forge entire industries, and some of the most iconic computers and video game consoles emerged thanks to it. In 1976, MOS was acquired by Commodore, where Chuck was able to convince President Jack Tramiel that computers were the way to go. Their first major project together was the Commodore PET 2001, which seems eerily similar to the TRW 2001. Perhaps they were just both big Stanley Kubrick fans. In any event, affordable microprocessors had an immediate impact on retail systems. In 1977, a New York restaurateur named Gene Mosher began to write what would be the first point-of-sale software on his Apple II computer. Customers of his restaurant would have their orders entered on the machine and it would print out in the kitchen. It would eventually use a special 65-foot serial cable connected to an Apple Silent-type thermal printer to do this. Because his kitchen staff received the orders immediately, meals could be prepared remarkably fast. So just where did this idea come from?
I was a self-employed builder of sub shops and operator. I made a ton of money. It was fun. It was hard work, but it made me the expert that I needed to be if I was going to uninvent the cash register. And it was the Apple computer that I had bought back there in the summer of '77 that gave me the tool I needed. I had to learn a little basic, but that wasn't hard.
Now, it just so happens that my own personal Apple II computer played a part in point-of-sale history. The original owner purchased it in 1978 to form a company to build and sell a terminal to McDonald's. The company started in a garage in Menlo Park and was called Abacus II. They used my computer along with one other as the development system, programmed primarily in Forth. Well, before long, they had a working prototype, so they reserved the entire floor of the Transamerica building in San Francisco, just 4 floors from the top, to show a demonstration to their prospective client. However, when they went to use the prototype, it just sat there and decided not to work. The company hobbled along for a few more months, and that was that. Apparently, the computer had quite the storied past, as it was also used to successfully bet on roulette wheels in Reno and was connected to the Stargate project, which was a top-secret defense investigation into psychic phenomena. Classified documents from the project can be seen on the back wall here. Oh, if computers could talk. Well, I guess they can, but you know what I mean.
Shall we play a game?
By the way, one of the Forth developers who used this computer was legendary phone phreaker John Draper, better known as Captain Crunch. If you're unfamiliar with the story, John famously discovered that the toy whistle found in Captain Crunch cereal boxes could produce a 2600 Hz tone which allowed hackers to make illegal long-distance phone calls. More sophisticated devices called blue boxes were made for similar purposes. A young Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak created and sold about 100 of them, and Jobs credits that phase as critical to the funding and formation of Apple. Back in 2022, I had the opportunity to meet John and thought it would be kind of cool to have him sign the lid. Then just a few months later, I was attending a keynote speech by Steve Wozniak and also had him sign it. Since then, I've just made it a habit to bring along the lid anytime I go to a conference if I know some notable Apple II folks will be there, and it's been a thrill to meet each and every one of them. Alright, well I better get back on track here. As we entered the 80s, there were some unique innovations, although some of those technologies would take decades before being widely adopted by the industry. After his Apple II point-of-sale device, Gene Mosher would go on to build the very first color touchscreen-driven point-of-sale interface called ViewTouch, powered by the Atari ST computer in 1986.
ViewTouch started out with the idea that I need to be able to take your order for a sub sandwich quickly and accurately, and get that sandwich made exactly the way you want it in your hands as fast as possible. That was the reason I invented graphic touchscreen point of sale.
Incredibly, the most recent versions of this software are still used and supported today as a free solution. Gene released the source code under the GNU public license to allow the community to update it as needed. ViewTouch was remarkable for a number of reasons, including the fact that it was one of the first applications to be built for a vertical market, but also that it used touchscreen in such an intelligent way and long before it was commonplace.
I did realize years ago, back then, even in the early 80s, I realized the only way everybody in the world was ever going to be able to use a computer, which today means smartphones, was if all they had to do was just touch items on a graphical display on the computer. So that was clear to me.
Chip-based credit cards are another example of old technology that has only recently been used. In 1985, the very first ones were introduced, yet in the US, it was only in the late 2010s where banks started to use them on a large scale. Credit cards originally had to be carbon copied by the clerk, and then usually once a month they'd physically mail the copy to the bank for processing. In the 70s, magnetic strips were introduced that contained information about the card and could be read by card readers. But with microchip technology, the so-called smart cards were invented. They offered better protection from fraud with the help of microprocessors embedded within them.
The processor has the same processing capability as an Apple IIe. It has a 64K memory and an 8-bit processor.
It was also around this time that a company called Check Robot introduced self-checkout machines. The very first one was installed at a Kroger store in Atlanta, Georgia. So up until now, we've mostly been talking about point of sale in retail or restaurant settings. But there's also a more specialized vertical, mail couriers. This is the market that MOS Scale International was after. By 1985, they were still a small company with a staff of about 50 people, predominantly focused in the private sector. But then everything changed. MOS CEO Ken Lewis was at a trade show where he was approached by a post office representative looking to modernize their stores. Ken convinced them that they had built their latest model specifically with the post office in mind, which was of course quite a stretch. That model was the PVS 250, the same unit that I picked up. The all-in-one design included a built-in monitor, keyboard, and floppy disk drive, but uniquely, it also had a built-in scale, whose load cells were incredibly accurate and could be calibrated to a 32nd of an ounce for items up to 70 pounds. Looking inside, we discover a clean integrated setup. All of the cards are housed nicely in this cage, complete with a lock-in gate and a generous amount of expansion slots. The processor card reveals that the unit is powered by the Motorola 6800 chipset, specifically the 6802, and just about everything is proprietary, including custom ROMs, a custom OS, and even a custom video signal. After the conference, they struck a $17 million deal to provide 5,000 of their new computers. That October, the post office had their first trial location at their 3401 West Devon Street store in Chicago. This news article describes the cutting-edge technology, with each computer having 2 screens, and how all they needed was to put the weight and the zip code, and the customer could immediately see several payment options in real time for air, surface, and small package rates. While these are all things that we've come to expect, there was a time when the clerk would have to get a book of shipping zones and manually determine the cost based on the weight, and that could take a lot of time. What made this all the more impressive was that the entire software required just 32 kilobytes of RAM. It was programmed by Chris Piedmont and a small team.
There just wasn't a lot of space. So, every byte was dear. I remember working with guys saying, okay, we've got a 2K load image for where the code comes in, and this particular load module is 16 bytes over size. We got to figure out how to squeeze 16 bytes out of this code and, get this to compile to something 16 bytes less before we can actually get this, to run in the system. It was that kind of work.
In 1987, the computers were upgraded to 16-bit machines powered by the Motorola 68000. USPS rebranded the computers as Integrated Retail Terminals, or IRTs, and started asking for larger quantities, resulting in $200 million contract bids, and that's when other companies started to take notice. One of them was Unisys, who ended up splitting the contract with MOS, with each vendor providing the post office with 7,500 IRTs. Each unit would store the transaction history on floppy disks. At the end of the day, the data would be collected off of them and sent to DC to track billions of dollars in transactions. These things were essentially running the entire United States post office accounting system. By the late 80s, they even communicated online tracking and delivery confirmation details over a 300 baud modem to CompuServe.
We did the first express mail tracking system with those units. We did a partnership deal with CompuServe, and what we would do was periodically we'd dial the modem and log into CompuServe, upload the tracking numbers and the zip codes and the times to CompuServe, and they had a database up there. And then the post office could query, either by tracking number or location, whatever information they wanted. And we had it working really, really well. They rolled it out. Then they decided they were going to make some enhancements to it. I remember this. And so their programmers took over. By the time they were done with their enhancements, the data was tracking anywhere from 12 to 18 hours behind the actual, packages, where we were within maybe 30 minutes. So it was worthless for tracking. I mean, you could only find out pretty much after a package was delivered, what route it had taken and what had gone. So they completely lost the utility that we created. And I remember thinking at the time, yep, this is government in action.
By the mid-90s, as the numbers kept growing, the big dogs could smell where the money was. In 1996, the post office entered a $1 billion contract with IBM and NCR to replace all of the IRT computers with 73,000 new ones as part of a 3-stage point-of-sale one initiative intended to create an integrated network for postal clerks and customers. Eventually, in 2005, NCR won out, with the USPS giving them exclusive contracting rights as the sole provider of the new Windows-based computers for all of their locations. And to this day, that is still the case, although I believe they may have upgraded from Windows NT by now. Then, in 2012, the very last IRT was removed from a store in New Florence, Pennsylvania. Let us pause for a moment of silence. One thing that I find quite extraordinary is the incredible staying power of NCR, a company that formed in the 1880s to sell the very first cash register, continued to push the envelope in retail processing technology throughout the 20th century and is still leading the space. However, there has been a growing trend that actually led NCR to split into two distinct organizations to help strengthen their focus. Over the last several years, many companies have started to build their own software solutions to save costs. McDonald's was one of the first to do this. From the late 70s to the 90s, they used custom solutions from Panasonic and PAR technology. Those units were costing each store about $40,000, so they switched to an in-house solution built on MS-DOS and off-the-shelf parts for less than half the cost. In 2007, McDonald's acquired the source code to the new POS system from MediaWorks, adapting it to become their own solution called NP6, which they still use today. They even have a mobile game to teach their employees how to run the registers with it. So what does point of sale look like these days? Well, pretty much anyone with a smartphone essentially has their own mobile retail terminal with them at all times. I'm sure you've done transactions that way at places like food trucks or the farmer's market. For larger establishments like retail and supermarkets, the use of smart cards is starting to gain traction. They are essentially shopping carts which use AI, cameras, and scales to calculate and ultimately purchase your groceries automatically, so you can skip the checkout process entirely and stroll right out of the store. There are also companies trying to crack down on theft by using special AI cameras that check your card as you leave and match it against your receipt. Well, that was a look back at the evolution of point-of-sale computers. It really is crazy to consider just how much these devices helped shape technology. It kind of makes me wish I paid more attention to the registers that I used when I worked at Petco in high school. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.